From Design to Development for Devices, a Primer, was presented as part of the Flash in the City conference. This presentation was originally recorded on June 11, 2011, in New York City.
It's 4:30, the sirens are going. The start of my presentation, wicked. Welcome to New York. I told the camera guy that they're going to have their work cut out for me as he tries to follow me. Being a jerk, right? So, how many people here are designers? How many people here are developers? How many people consider themselves both? Oh, interesting. All right. So people are like, maybe. All right. So my presentation was originally going to be from design to development. And then people started talking about how do you, get things on devices and all those kind of things. And so the development part started to wane a little bit. And then some people started talking about design elements, and some of that started to wane a little bit. And so actually what I'm going to give you is more of a user experience kind of talk and more of a high-level bit. And hopefully it goes off well. So let's start this off. So I'm Stacey Mulcahy. If you can't pronounce my last name, just don't try. It's okay. I'll still love you. Sometimes I kind of have a gap, and when I'm bored, I try to see what fits in between it for shits and giggles. So that's me at CES doing that. Up until this week, I worked at a company called Technician. We're based out of Ottawa, Ontario. Yeah, represent. There's like one other person who even knows where that place is. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's right. Show some love for the Canadian here. Come on. That's right. Yeah. The only clapping I'm going to get the entire thing. And so at Technician, we work mostly with the Flash platform, some Android. And we like to build apps that we consider, for lack of a better word, sexy. So you'll never see anything that's standard looking. Our focus is really on user experience and making apps look really nice. And so a lot of time I spend basically cursing someone I might be working with who has made my life exponentially harder. And so the last thing that we kind of did at Technician is that we worked alongside, we were hired by QNX, and we worked a little bit on the playbook. And, basically they took a couple of our people and made them part of the user experience team. And personally, I got to work alongside of Julian Dolce, and if you don't know him and you're doing playbook development, you should know him. He's exceptional developer, really good at what he does. I've never seen someone who can do something quicker than him. And I helped him basically as code monkey, whatever you want me to do, I did. And so that was kind of the last thing we worked on. So moving towards mobile computing. If you've never seen one of my prezos, I aim to kind of make people laugh a little bit, obviously, and I speak to slides. I'm going to warn you now, you might be offended. I'm just warning you now. So, mobile computing. I looked up mobile computing, put it in the Googles, and this is the image I got. Thought it was awesome. So, with mobile computing, how many people are building mobile apps? Yeah. If no one's, we should all be putting up our hand at some point, if not now, next week, or in the next, month, right? So with mobile computing, there's a lot of challenges that, we have: connectivity, hardware, battery life. And those are things that we're not really used to when you're, developing an experience for someone sitting at a desktop. And so, in the last year or so, we now have tablet computing, if you want to call it that. Someone tweeted at Adobe, and I'm sure Adobe's going to hate me, but whatever, that there were 50 devices to be released that were Flash-enabled, whatever that may mean, for 2011. So that's 50 different devices that you could have your content running on. What that means in terms of Flash-enabled is a little bit obscure, but that means that, before we had a couple options and suddenly we have 50. It's funny, when you start to look at things, especially new topics coming out in technology, I like to search for that term and see how other people see us. And so I went to stock photography and I was looking at, how do people kind of depict tablets? And so, you see in this one, for example, here's that chick on the beach running, third image in. That's really practical, right? Oh, by the way, hold on, let me just get my tablet out of my ass and like pull it out and start doing something, right? Besides, I look beautiful and perfect. The person on the couch, that's a little bit more realistic, but you're starting to see that they're inside and they're outside, right? Not your atypical scenario, not looking like at a desk kind of thing. So, that's how Corbis, for example, sees it. You go into iStock Photo and it's just like, shit, I don't know what you do with this, so I'm just going to show you the device. I'm not going to give you any context whatsoever, right? That kind of thing. And then you go into the next one and it's all like, hey, tablets, medical, and old people. What up? You know what I mean? Like, this is our future happening right here. Baby boomers, we're going to, tailor towards them. And some of those are practical for sure, but, the whole, like, let me look over your shoulder while, while you're looking up what this term means kind of thing, not so sure. So then you start getting into, casual computing. And tablets, I guess you could consider them a bit of a luxury product. Like, how many people here have a tablet that they paid for? Okay, that did change it. Okay, not a lot, right? Like, we're looking at, maybe 15, 20% of the crowd has a tablet, right? How many people have a smartphone? Right, so big difference, right? So they're still considered, I would call it a luxury product. And they're kind of casual in the sense of what we do on them and where we do it. So I don't know, how many people are going to fess up to this scenario? Because I am. I never go to the shitter without my phone. Honestly, I'm not going to lie. And if you need to get a hold of me, just text me. I'll respond, right? But it's true. It's portable. It's not like you don't see someone rolling in their desktop with that. And tablets are different because they're more about sharing, and they're not as private or personal. And you are more likely to find yourself looking up something and passing it to the next person and saying, hey, take a look at this. But on your laptop, you're kind of a little bit more like, this is my personal space. I don't really look up stuff and say, oh, hey, check this out. See what's on my laptop. My laptop is very, sacred. My tablet, not so much, right? So it's becoming more social in that sense. You can see them for entertainment purposes, people on trains and planes and those kind of things. And you also, see people in the bathtub. Don't do this, okay? Like, I've done it. Don't do it. Doesn't work, okay? But, you can take them pretty much anywhere. You can, you go in your kitchen and the uses for them are different. All of a sudden, you look up something, you got, your recipe holder right there for you. If you're like me, you end up spilling like oil all over it and then you screw your device all together, right? But once again, it's got a different purpose. It's almost, if you look at this item, it's almost tangible. It's almost replacing a tangible item, which is your cookbook, right? And hell, you can even take them in the car like this redneck, right? Okay? And I've seen this, not necessarily this, but I've seen this, where someone's like trying to drive and operate their device, and they're all like, yeah. It's like the chick doing her mascara. You just want to slap them, you know what I mean? But it's the same thing. I mean, you can take it in the car kind of thing. And, they show up at breakfast tables. So instead of a tangible physical paper, we now have a tablet where we have many papers on it. And instead of one magazine, we have full-fledged magazines. And they're not just, articles, so to speak, but interactive pieces, right? Like, imagine Playboy on that. Dude, a whole new venue just opened up for people, right? True multimedia experiences kind of thing. And what we do on them are very different as well. We play games on these devices, phones and tablets. Is that not the best picture? So cute, right? Some guy decided to photograph his family's Angry Birds, and I was like, this is the best thing I've seen forever, right? But we play casual games on these devices as well. And it's something to consider because how many people here own a game console, right? So like an Xbox or a Wii or, PlayStation or whatnot. If you're like me, you might have all of them, right? And those consoles are meant to play those games. The hardware's there, you've got the games, it's the perfect environment for it, and yet we're still spending lots of times playing games on our tablets or on our iPhones or our smartphones or whatever. And they're not as intrusive, right? If you're going home to go play a game, you're turning on your TV, you're sitting your ass down, right? And you have your controller and you're doing the hunch or whatever you might be doing for 5 hours straight. Whereas casual games, you pick it up wherever you're at, you're killing some time and you're done. So, the future of these kind of things, anywhere you can put kind of like an LCD, is different. And you don't really need the audio for this, to be honest.
Starts now.
Okay.
Inspired by the new reality,
you can put it in if you want.
Created a true first.
That's fine.
Seamless digital and
they don't need it.
Harmony. From Icons menu.
The screen away from a world previously confined to your mobile device or computer.
Hold on. Screen on my camera.
Imagine an alternative future.
There we go. We all want to see this again, right?
A future
so
where
pathetic.
your car effortlessly unites with
I'm
your
going to commentate.
life. We did.
Oh, I'm moving. Oh, I can't really see it, can you?
We call it Icon. And the future starts now. Inspired by the new reality, Saab has created a true first. Seamless digital and automotive harmony. From Icon's menu, you're only a touch of the screen away from a world previously confined to your mobile device or computer. And only an idea away from creating and uploading your own Icon app. So staying in touch on the go, sharing experiences as they happen.
Because you're doing this while you're driving, right?
Focal point for you, your Saab, and your life has never been clearer.
I'm just waiting for the crash. Insurance ad follows.
Icon. The future starts now.
The future starts with a logo I ripped off from someone else. So, it's the idea of people are starting to hear about being able to develop things for the car, right? And you'll start to hear a lot more about this. For those of you who have seen QNX at any of the conferences, they show what they've been working on. They do a lot in the car industry as well. And so now, us, Air developers can, go towards that kind of venue, and that's coming. Now, once again, form factor and context is everything, right? So I don't know if you're going to be sitting there, liking your friends' posts and poking them on Facebook while you're necessarily driving. Maybe your passenger is. But, it's one of those things to consider. So when you start coming to things along, tablet computing or touchscreen, we start dealing with the idea of input, right? I love this picture. Input changes suddenly, right? So we're really used to keyboards, right? So keyboards are super precise, okay? Super flexible. It's not very intrusive, and you get immediate feedback. And feedback is in touch and in sound, okay? So you touch it, you feel it, okay? And you hear the click, click, click of the keyboard or someone's really annoying keyboard. You get that immediate feedback when you're using a keyboard, super precise, okay? With a mouse, once again, a mouse is pretty precise in that sense, but it's really efficient. So you can move 14 inches across the screen with 3 inches of your arm, okay? So really, really efficient in terms of real estate when it comes to a mouse. And then you come to a stylus, okay? And a stylus gives you a lot of freedom, right? You can just move your arm around, touch, touch, touch. But the accuracy is pretty much I mean, I have written here low accuracy, but accuracy is pretty much shit, right? Who am I kidding? So when you come to touchscreen, our inputs are typically our fingers, right? So you get into one of these problems.
I gotta call the plant and warn them.
The fingers you have used to dial are too fat. To obtain a special dialing wand, please mash the keypad with your palm now.
So who's had that? Like, I've had that, where you go to, like, you know, click on something and you're just like, I think my fingers are too fat, or I keep missing, or those kind of things. So you have your finger, especially a single finger, right? And it's direct, but, you know, it's not necessarily accurate. And so interfaces that aren't forgiving are really hard to use. You often miss-hit or overshoot, sometimes they call it. And it's not very quick, right? I don't know about you guys, but I do not like typing emails on any kind of a touch device whatsoever. I'd rather shoot myself, right? Because it's like, you start feeling like you're pigeon fingering again, like that designer who sits beside you, right? We all know that person, right? That's my dad. So, you know, with multi-point or, you know, multi-finger, two hands, you obviously get a little bit more that you can do, but once again, the accuracy is a really big issue that we have to consider. And a lot of people think that they can just write something once and make it work everywhere and not worry about those kind of inputs that you're using, and that's a misnomer. You got to really worry about those things. With fingers come lots of other things, okay? Fingernails, right? You got the crazy chick who gets, you know, leopard print on her nails. I saw watermelon yesterday, print or whatever. And you come, you know, greasy fingerprints, right? We all know that. And those can affect what you're doing. Never mind the real estate that a finger takes, okay? You think about a mouse cursor, really tiny, really precise. You think about a finger, your finger's now covering up at least 40 to 40 pixels, no matter what you're trying to select. And designers forget that, right? You also deal with physical fatigue, right? So trying to do something on a device, you have much more physical fatigue because inputting information takes much more out of you than, you know, if you're at a keyboard, for example. You also deal with left-handedness. This might offend people, okay? But it's one of those things. Do you need to adapt for left-handedness? All right? Touch and gesture. So we're going to start talking about different kinds of gestures and you know, fundamentally, what do they mean? And we're going to start moving into building something specifically for something like a tablet device or whatnot, and what you need to account for. So, types of gestures. There's manipulative, and there's ones that communicate. That's usually how they kind of group them, okay? Manipulation ones we're all used to, right? How do you enlarge a photo, right? How do you, you know, change a view, for example? Those kind of things, sliding, whatnot. When you manipulate something, it's usually very direct, okay, and it's with your fingers. It could be indirect. If you're on your computer, maybe with your touchpad, all right? It's usually continuous motion, okay? You're not chaining things. A swipe, a move, a pinch, a zoom, all right? And it's usually one finger or multi-fingers. With you know, communicative, we'll talk about those, but those tend to be more complex, and therefore they're not as successful for most people. So gestures, okay? There's lots of things to consider about when working with gestures. And gestures, you know, not only have what they communicate, but they also have, you know, based on culture differences as well. Different gestures mean different things in different cultures. So we all know this kind of, you know, gesture. Some of us may know this one, right? Maybe, maybe not. Come see me later if you want me to explain it. I won't demonstrate it though. And then you get, you know, the differences between what means what in different cultures, okay? And, you know, this is a big one. It makes a big difference because you're not just, you know, that transforms not only to gestures, but it transforms into things like internationalization of your app, or localization, if you want to call it that, but more internationalization, right? So some things that are positive in one culture are not positive in another. But it's, once again, it's about context, right? Most gestures that we deal with manipulate items, and that's why you're using those gestures. Gestures that communicate tend to be a little bit more complex and, you know, symbolic. typical one that communicates is, I would say, a signature, right? You're having to move your hand, one continuous motion, you might stop, that kind of thing. But, you might be mimicking something in the physical world. So signature is a good example of that, and it's often why you don't see a lot of those being used, because they're hard to interpret. Gestures are ultimately about context and who is performing them, okay? Because we all look at this picture and we're like, oh, that baby is so cute. Like, oh, I want to go have babies now. Like, look how cute that is, right? But if this was like some other person giving you the finger, you'd be like, dude, outside now. I'm going to kick your ass, right? So it's all about context. Baby performing is cute, someone else not so cute, right? And that's one thing to consider. So when you're coming to the gestures, how many people here wireframe? Or have to read a wireframe, right, at some point, right? Not a lot of people. Do you guys just dig in and start getting at it? Wireframes are weird now. So when I started with wireframes, they were very much like page to page to page, right? And then all of a sudden you had apps that were areas were refreshing and whatnot. And now you have wireframes that have these icons in them that are trying to signify how you navigate something or the experience. And so you're starting to see these, okay? And so you start to see these gestures, and we have things like tap, double tap, drag, flick, right? A drag is slow, so you might be doing a timeline kind of thing, and a flick is next, next, next. Okay? We know what these are, we're used to them, okay? Especially the drag and the flick. I mean, we've all used them in photo galleries or those kind of apps. Two-finger ones tend to be things that you're going to manipulate the size. So the pinch, the spread, okay, press and tap. The one thing you have to worry about when you're doing anything that's multi-finger is that people have different coordination abilities, right? And so the ability to coordinate a gesture is important. It has to be very easy and forgiving, because someone who doesn't have as good coordination, you can't account for that, or finger size, for example. So those variances make developing apps like this a little bit harder. You have, the press and drag and the rotate and all these things that I've never seen a lot of people really use. Okay, but apparently they're there, and part of this gestural language we're all supposed to know. And more complex gestures tend to bundle them together. So a sequence of things might do something. So you might press and drag and then move it across. You might see something like this more on a Surface table, for example. Something with a lot more room. Okay, because a lot of the devices that we're working with don't necessarily have the real estate for it. And that's the problem, is that when you are working on a device that starts introducing a new gestural language, how do you teach someone to do it, right? Not everyone wants to sit there and figure out how to use it. So how many people here have a playbook? Oh, RIM, get on that. You guys aren't doing your job. You got free playbooks for everyone. I just overpromised. But the thing with the playbook is it's anyone who's used. How many people have used one and played with one? Okay, that's better. That's probably a better question. Sorry, I should be fair, shouldn't I? It has its own kind of gestural language. How do you? There's no back button. There's no home button. How do you start to navigate between apps? And so suddenly you're like, oh, there's a bezel, and I need to come up across it, and all these things. And you need to teach someone that. How do you teach them? And so you start to see all the promo videos really show you the device, the person using it. And so automatically you're learning that as a user. When you get your playbook, they have this nice little overlay film, and they kind of show you, oh, here you go. Here's a little tidbit, in case you're super challenged and can't figure it out, which would be me. And, another way to teach someone this gestural language. And as we start to see more tablets coming out, some people might take those chances that the playbook took, and it becomes a problem because these gestures are part of the device, and do you work with them or against them in your app? So working with this kind of thing is there's two big differences between touch-enabled and touch-optimized, right? And huge difference. And people kind of forget about, those kind of things. Enabled means that you're kind of accounting for it. So your controls are appropriately sized, those kind of things. That doesn't mean it's optimized for touch, because once again, you're building something for something, but you're not taking advantage of necessarily the form factors. And I really urge people who are developing any kind of apps here, nothing pisses me off more than the whole mantra of build once, deploy everywhere. If you truly believe that, I seriously want to talk to you later and pick a fight. All right? Dwayne, money on me. How many people would like me versus Dwayne? Dude, yeah, even Dwayne, yeah, I'll put all my money on you, bitch. Right? But it's one of those things where write once, deploy many. It works if you're building something that's a kind of like, mediocre experience for people, but if you really want to build a good experience for people, you need to take advantage of the form factors that each of those items provide. And so, it might mean you have to do a little bit of design work and account for this stuff. It means you might have to change the way some things work, on the different devices. So, touch optimized is, way different. You're going to take advantage of the gestures available to you, and you're going to use them in a meaningful way. Okay? You're also going to worry about filtering data and not inputting data, right? Inputting is hard for people, so stay away from input as much as you can. And when I mean filtering data is that if someone's trying to input, suggest things to them, keep their favorites, keep their history, anything you can do to make that way more efficient, okay? The worst kind of scenario is point, select, and text. If I'm on a touch device and I got to point and then select it and then enter in something, you just lost 5 minutes of my time, right? The best scenario, obviously, is select. Just touch, 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 okay? And a lot of people forget that. So, touch size and targets. Touch size and targets is one of those things where you kind of you start worrying about the size of someone's finger and where you're placing your UI elements, okay? And it does make a difference. Finger size is variable. And different companies, Apple, Microsoft, even research, they say different things about, touch size and targets. So does size matter? Of course it does. Hello. Everyone's been lying to everyone for years, okay? But Apple kind of says it's 44 by, 44 pixels, right? I think in the Windows, when I looked it up, they had 34 pixels. MIT study said it was, 10 to 14 millimeters, etc. All these different people say variable things. And the hard part about using emulators is that you have no idea. You can't emulate how that device is going to work, how it's going to register your finger touch or any of those things. So, better safe than sorry. When someone says 44, by 44, it doesn't mean that your button has to be visually 44 by 44. Okay? It means that the size of its target area should be of that size, and people forget that. So if your designer wants to build something that's a little bit smaller and not as chunky looking, they can. But as a developer, you need to account for that size isn't going to cut it. So you need to account for targets. You get into what we're going to talk about is Fitz Law. And I can't really, I'm not going to sit here and give you a lesson because God knows someone could do it way better than I. But Fitz Law is one of those things that comes into the idea of, and here's this, equation that makes me want to cry. And it's the idea at the end of the day when it comes to Fitz Law is bigger things are easier to hit than smaller things. And closer things are easier to hit than those farther away. That's what it means in plain English. Okay? And that's common sense. But someone has an awesome calculation for it. Now they're famous. Thanks, Fitz. But, something that's, farther away is going to take you longer and it's going to be harder for you to work to get that. Okay? And so that means that when you're building a device, you want to keep things, building an application, you want to try to keep things around the area that you're doing the work. So don't click here and pop up something way over here, for example. And I know this is common sense, but it's amazing what you see when people do that. Okay? With the target area, it's the idea of, how many people know the invisible button? Right? All old Flash people, know the invisible button. And that's basically what this is. It's some of the items are they look small and tiny, but the hit area is quite big. there's actually a term for it, and it's called iceberg tips. Okay, and that's like what you see and what you can hit is much, smaller than what's actually there to hit. So, iceberg tips. Okay. Increasing the hit size of the area doesn't mean you have to increase the way it looks, and people forget that. We had this argument several times just building different apps at Technician, and it was like, we don't need to necessarily go with the big, chunky look that's in right now. We can go something smaller, we just need to account for it. The other concern when you're doing this is making sure you have the proper size between elements. So if you're building anything that's really tightly, grid-oriented and really tight to each other, you need to not only consider the hit area, but the size between the components, because your interface should be forgiving. If I miss hit, I shouldn't accidentally hit something else and then go, oh, what did I do? How do I get back there? Right? So you need to consider all those things when you're designing and when you're implementing them as well. There's also the idea of, it's called the adaptive interface. Okay, and this is probably best seen on your iPhone keyboard. And what happens is that when you go to pop open the keyboard and you're using it, underneath all of this, what they're doing is that they're changing the size of the keys based on what they think you're going to hit next. So if you go T, H, they're going to go and increase the size of the E because that's most often what you're going to hit next after TH, for example. I mean, this is really difficult to implement as a developer well. Best example is here, and you start to see this most often in keyboards because you need to fit a lot of things in a small space. When it comes to things like touch target size and finger size, this is a really good book, and my font's a little messed up, as you can tell, but it's a good book, and it gives you a good sense about those basic things and the sizes that you should use. I read it, and actually I'd really recommend it. And that will give you a sense, and that's where some of those items were referenced from. Activity touch zones. So activity touch zones, believe it or not, these are the things that are, and there's a link for that as well, but these are the, what's easiest to operate with. So the green areas, or it looks green on my screen, those are the easiest to operate, and the ones that are red are the ones that you have to extend and work the most for. Okay, and those make sense. They're the ones at the top and the bottom, and the ones usually close to where your thumbs are when you're holding a device are the ones that are, the easiest to kind of hit or operate within. So activity touch points are important because if you're designing something as a designer, you need to think about if that is something you want someone to do, you want someone to click, you want to make sure it's in an easy place to do it. You don't want to make it difficult for the user. And so those do change a little bit from what you might be doing for a desktop app. So, I'm just whizzing through this, eh? It's like realism and design, all right? When we're talking about design concepts, realism is a big one, right? And how many people know Scott McCloud? Yeah, am I your favorite person right now? Because I'm referencing, see, yeah, I got a thumbs up, that's right. Scott McCloud, do yourself a favor, capture this, go read his stuff, or look him up on his TED Talks, amazing. He talks about understanding comics. But once you go and you see his prezzo, it will change the way you think, especially if you're a designer. Okay? And so one of the things I wanted to bring that he kind of brings to the table is the idea of, if you look at something and it's too realistic, it's really hard to relate to. If you look at something that's very simple, you can kind of pull out the meaning of it and, relate to it a little bit more. Right? And so he's talking about this in cartoons. So you can relate personally, because I'm not male with a bad comb over, okay? I can relate to the happy face better than I can to the other one, right? And so this does come into play, believe it or not, when it comes into design. I'm just going to let him talk about his bit.
Where something which resembles the physical world can be abstracted in a couple of different directions. Abstracted from resemblance, but still retaining the complete meaning, or abstracted away from both resemblance and meaning towards the picture plane. Put all these three together and you have a nice little map of the entire boundary of visual iconography, which comics can embrace. And if you move to the right, you also get language, because that's abstracting even further from resemblance. But
his whole prezzo is like that, by the way. It's absolutely brilliant. Just goes through, you'll never look at comics the same. And so how does that apply to us? How does that apply to designers or developers, right? And what that means is that if something is too realistic, it's a little off-putting. So if you look at an icon that you're going to say, I'm going to design an icon that looks like this, Or maybe it's going to look like this, it's a little more simple. Or maybe it'll look like that, even more simple. Or, fairly simple, one of those things. The more simple you can make it and, make a person kind of, relate to it and pull the meaning out of it, the better you are. If you saw that first icon in your camera app in your iPhone, you'd be like, what the F is that? But there's this little camera, it makes sense, you know what it is, you know what it does, and you can relate to it. So you're busy using it, not thinking about it, right? And this is one thing to consider because Apple's really saying realistic design, and you need to know when it makes sense and when it doesn't, right? And that brings us to the idea of the Uncanny Valley. So how many people have heard of the Uncanny Valley? Yeah, wicked. So I'm probably not going to explain it that well, but it's basically things that look too realistic and we know they're not real creep us out, right? Like Polar Express. How many people have seen that movie? Just creepy, okay? So that's basically what it is. And this is, for me, this does it. This guy right here, too realistic, little creepy, and you're starting to see advertisers are really loving this kind of aesthetic right now, right? So very, very creepy. And, this is the best example. It's usually used in terms of robotics.
We can use automatic things, but this is very complicated. 4 actuators around the lips, right? And we don't have any...
Yeah, creepy. It's like one step away from a real doll. But people love that stuff, right? And I look at her and I just notice something like there's dead eyes and it kind of creeps me out, right? So it means I no longer can really interact with it. I'm kind of repulsed by it. And that's what the Uncanny Valley is. It's that dip that happens, right? So, there's that point where you enjoy it, you can relate, and then suddenly you get this crazy dip. And, it's the idea that you can't relate to it anymore and you're repulsed by it. And so, the Uncanny Valley is most often used in robotics because we don't really want to see ourselves cloned in that kind of a way, right? So, going to move on to skeuomorphic design, and
skeuomorphic.
That's how, I don't know if you heard that, but that's how you pronounce it because I screw up everything. So, text to speech is my friend. Skeuomorphic, okay? And this is the idea that skeuomorphic design is basically the idea that you're taking something that's in a physical space and you're making a digital experience of it, and you're making it look as much as you can realistic to the physical entity of it. It means that you're favoring aesthetic over function, really. Okay? And so you're starting to see a bunch of apps. You see this most often, obviously, for the iPad or iPhone. And it's, the idea that, okay, well, you know how to use this app in real life. I'm going to take this app in real life and, make a digital version so you have an understanding of how it should work already. And so there's a bunch of examples of that. Realistic design or skeuomorphic design. And the problem with this is that what you're saying to the user is that you already have a knowledge domain. You understand how to use this device. And so in a digital context, when you try to recreate that, you might have to change the way some things work. So we're very used to turning a knob and how that should work, but suddenly on a device, you can't do this. You don't have no physical, you're doing this. And so often what happens is that you're saying, I'm going to take your domain and apply it here. And if you change it, all of a sudden the user just pulls back and doesn't really know where you're going with it. And so you can really actually isolate users with that if you don't do it correctly. And you start to see, most often, hey, shh. I like the look I got. That was cute. Anyways. Right, so you start to see this, and you get like Griffin's new stylus, right? I don't know if people have seen this, it's kind of cool. But it's once again, it's that idea of realistic design coming back. We all know how to use a coloring book and how it should feel and how crayons should feel in our hands. And can you replicate that? And so skeuomorphic design, once again, previous familiarity is leveraged, right? The design is familiar. People can come and start using it right away. And boom, no one's going to be wondering what's going on. But the bad parts are, you're depending on them to know that. The controls are often very big and chunky, so your design automatically becomes big and chunky, right? And it means that you can't fit as much stuff on a screen, so it often means that you are losing functionality whether or not you want to admit it. And there's often a level of expectation that the digital fails to meet in terms of the analog world, right? So, Apple says that design is subjective. It means that we're all forgiving of design, okay? It means that we are not forgiving of things that include real-world physics. So design, things like transitions and animations, they need to be spot on, the design does not. And that's kind of true, because we can all drop a ball, and we all know how it should bounce or feel or look, right? But with the design, we're more forgiving. Oh, that's not quite right, but that's okay. And you need to kind of worry about this, when it comes to anything like tablets, is are you using transitions and animations? And if so, are they necessary, right? Does it make sense? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So real-world physics. I'm going to have to just whiz through some of this stuff. I'll only show a couple frames of this. How many people have seen this video? It's awesome, right? But if this animation, if they did not actually go and build this and run it, we would all say, oh, we know that that was like faked, okay? Because we all understand, no matter what we do or where we come from, real-world physics. So you can't screw around with that, right? So I'll just leave that for a second. Otherwise, I'll start singing along and you guys will throw me out. How many people have heard of gorilla arm? Gorilla arm is due to physical fatigue. It's the idea that if you put a device and you mount it, most often vertically, it means that you're doing this. So suddenly, after a while, you're doing this. And you will see people do this at a kiosk after, especially at a museum when they're typing on something. And so they called it gorilla arm. Okay, and it's the ergonomics of using a device. And that's something that we often forget, right? So one of the things when it comes to that is interaction proximity. Keep all your interactions close to where you're trying to operate on. And then that way you reduce the physical fatigue. It's a good example of it. Right? Easier close to him, harder far apart. Okay? So, I'm going as fast as that music. Tangibility and context, okay? How many of us worked on a playbook app and never had a playbook in front of us, right? We did not know how it felt. We did not know the size, any of those things. Often you're doing that for other devices. As new devices come out, you're not going to have them. It's just the reality. Get used to it. People bitched about it all the time. Shut up. You're not going to have it. You're going to get them eventually, but figure out a way to deal with it, right? One of the things that you can do is they'll always give you the specs. Go out, print something like this, and physically hold it in your hands. What's the depth of it? Where do my fingers lie? How does it feel, et cetera, et cetera. If you design anything, put it on something like this and take it outside. Because if you are like any other normal person, you have used your device outside, and your design looks much different, okay? So there are ways to emulate an experience that you possibly can't have. And light versus dark is one of the big things when it comes to that. So how you see something in artificial lighting and how you might see it outside is a big, big difference. You need to worry about your graphics. The key to that often is just oversaturate your graphics, to be honest, and you can account for some of that stuff. Orientation. Orientation, this is a fun one. You always know when someone kind of flaked out on doing the work because they didn't do orientation work. They're just like, I'm forcing you to work in a certain mode. And sometimes those modes are best for those maps or those apps and they make sense. Okay, but often you turn something over and it doesn't reorient. You're like, oh, okay, right? You have to worry about how much size you have in each. It varies. Often on an iPad, when you have something in landscape and then you put it to portrait, all of a sudden you get a pop-up, right? Or a popover, they call them. And so this list that you had that was nice and across the way becomes a popover, right? So the iPad is different because it's larger and squarer, and things like the playbook are smarter or a little bit harder because the size is more of a 16:9 kind of thing than larger and square. And so you get into the ratio comparisons. You get into the swing comparison. Swing comparison is the idea that when you swing your device around, how do you have to move these items? So what is, how much swing do you have to do to your interface? Right? And, the iPad has less of a delta and change when it comes to the swing. And when you're coming to something like Playbook, it has way more. So your design needs to account for that. But like I said, some things they say are done in different orientations. So, depending on what you're doing, you might want to force someone into a certain orientation because it's best done in that. And this is an example, for example, the iPad, you swing it over and suddenly it's a popover and it's still making, sense of those items. And so things like background images that you want centered, you need now to account for both sizes. And, things like this become a little bit more of an issue. Yeah, I've got 1 minute. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah. Okay, filter, don't input, okay? Autocorrect properly when you can, okay? It makes laborious tasks less so. Get the user to edit if they need to. Favorites, those kind of things. Localization is a big one. So I got corrected in Amsterdam about this. This guy said, oh, it's not actually like this. But there's a story about how they localize an app. And porny, apparently, it means start in Romanian. Okay? Apparently this is incorrect, but I'm still going to tell the story because I like it. I don't care. But once you localize it, okay, it becomes truncated. So home is now porn, right? Things you need to consider and worry about when you're doing these kind of apps. And I'll just do one more slide because I think I'm running a little long. Localization versus internationalization. Big difference. Internationalization has to do with things like currency, okay? Those kind of things. Maybe image-specific flags, etc. Okay? Localization is about language. If you ever have to do an app for localization, okay, the languages that are hardest to deal with tend to be Thai, Finnish, and Chinese. Okay, Thai is the tallest language. Finnish apparently has the longest translation, and Chinese apparently is the most complicated in terms of character length. All right, I think I'm going to stop there. I've got like 3 more slides, but I'm never going to fit them in. So, you got shafted.